Hi, everybody, and welcome to a Saturday edition of All Marine Radio. In the course of our last conversation, Tim Lynch talked about different ethnic groups in Iran, and Timmy spent a lot of time in that region, right? He talked about the Azerbaijans, he talked about the Kurds, and he talked about the Baluchs. Well, that is all foreign to me, and I spent some time in the area, but I was focused on one spot of the Helmand River Valley. I could tell you a lot about that, but so I thought it'd be a good thing if Timmy came on and explained the makeup of Iran relative to ethnic groups. So, without further ado, on a Saturday, here is the one and only Tim Lynch. Well, good morning on a Saturday. Don't normally do this, but we're not normally at war with Iran. So, because it is a special occasion, I thought that I'd have Tim on. And, you know, Tim, first of all, how many years did you spend in Iraq and then Afghanistan total?
It would have been 3 months in Iraq, and then I was sent to Afghanistan. I stayed there for 8 years.
Okay, so 8 years and 3 months. All right.
Hmm.
So Tim will talk about different tribes that he's bumped into in his various adventures in that part of the world. And I was thinking about this the other day. I mean, did not right did not impact my life. I didn't travel like that. I could tell you right everything about every bridge going over the Helmand River in Ao Montezuma. I could tell you about the Sistani Peninsula. I could tell you about Treknawa. I could tell you about Lashkar Gah. I could tell you about our battle space. But, and this occurred to me the other day when you were talking about ethnic groups. And I knew the Iranian border was to our south, but I did not have a good understanding of what part of Iran is that? Is that the northern Iranian border? Where the hell? I mean, and so that's moderately embarrassing, that realization. And I probably should never shared it with anybody, but I have. And so I wanted to remedy that. So what I did was, based on some of the things Tim said, I got my Google Earth out. And I love Google Earth, right? And I make overlays and things that I do. And then I started labeling different regions, right? Because, big discussion about the Kurds, right? Where are they? And so to help me understand that, if you're familiar with where they're at in Iraq, right? They're north, right, of where Saddam Hussein grew up, right? So they're in the northern part of Iraq, and then that stretches into Iran, if I'm not mistaken. So, so who are these different ethnic groups that we hear so much about? And then not only who are they, but what percentage of the population does each represent? And so I think that's an important little piece of information. So I thought I'd have Timmy back on, and we talk about the ethnic makeup of Iran. And so, first of all, thanks for getting up and doing this.
Oh, I'm pleasure to be here, Mac. Always enjoyed doing a podcast with you.
What before we start talking about ethnic stuff, um, anything? It's been, I'm sure, for the people that are on the receiving end of it, or the Israeli people, or the people in the region. But in terms of news that breaks squelch, it's pretty much business as normal in terms of us dismantling a country. And again, this is what we do best. Tim and I were actually talking about a story that is unconfirmed, which is kind of crazy. That's the thing that caught both of our eye that did, in a great way, break squelch. But talk about the headline that we both saw on Facebook.
Well, it concerned the IRGC Quads Force commander named Ismail Kouani, who's a brigadier general.
Wait a minute. I thought that was could. I thought it's pronounced like
Quds. I'm sorry. You are correct. It is Quds.
quads are in your legs. Okay. So when you go to
Yeah,
the
yeah.
gym, that's what you work on.
Quds Force. Correct, sir. But anyway, the head of the Quds Force commander at first was reported to have been executed for being an Israeli spy, and then I saw on Facebook, which is always a great news source, that he was in fact alive and in Israel, which was immediately debunked by MSN. So we don't know what the hell's happened to the guy. I would say he probably got taken into custody and is no longer with us. But that was just an interesting story. And it shows you how much information is flowing around that's very tough to verify. And yeah, I saw that on Facebook. I'm like, oh my God, he's in Israel. What a great story. Until you start tracking down, excuse me, who the source is, which is an Israeli news agency, which is strictly a Facebook account. There's no Israeli news agency internet website. It's just all Facebook. So probably not true.
But
Yeah.
but
But a good
it has
story.
all the hallmarks of something that could be true, and that
It
is
does.
right. The Mossad is the one that leaks the story that says this guy's been executed, so they can protect him. Right? The Iranians aren't
You,
saying shit
he's
because they don't want people to know that this guy disappeared and he was spying for the Israelis the whole time. And so I mean, I would tell you that it's unverified. So what you read was MSNBC said it was unconfirmed, right?
right.
Okay.
Right. Oh no, no. Yeah, I think that's what they said. But yeah, it's unconfirmed. That's exactly what they said. But I mean, just think about the fact that the Quds Force commander working for the Israelis, that would be like the head of MI6 working for the Soviets, and that happened. So who knows? That actually happened. So who knows? It could well be true.
Well,
But it's
why
just
would
one
the
of those
head of
stories that makes you
MI6
shake your
work for
head.
this? Why would the head of MI6 work for the Soviets?
Oh, that was the Cambridge guys from back in the 30s. There was a bunch of Soviet spies riddled throughout the English
Okay, I was
intelligence
thinking
network.
post World. I
That's a
was thinking
long time ago.
right post World War II. Okay,
Yeah,
all
post
right.
World War II, right?
The again, but just in terms of our conversations about this stuff, the great challenge for the president and for the nation and for certainly for the Department of War is to stay out of a ground war in Iran. And I think the president's done a great job saying, look, we can create the circumstances for the Iranians to figure it out on their own. But again, I don't. You see people saying that. I saw a headline yesterday that Trump has considered putting ground troops, in Iran, yada yada yada, and I just don't believe that. I don't. And again, but we went to Somalia. And this thought occurred to me yesterday. We went to Somalia because people were starving there. The UN couldn't do anything about it. And all this video was coming back onto American TVs of children starving, flies crawling on their eyeballs, and all the shit you see when that happens. That's why we went. That's what generated Black Hawk Down. Okay. And so was the juice worth the squeeze? Was it worth those American lives? Was it that much in our national interest to go do so? And you can't be all things to all people. And so my own opinion is Donald Trump knows that. But the harder part is, right, the outpouring of emotion around the world by Iranians about when Khomeini was killed, right? And then what happens when that turns 50-50 to the United States? Why don't you help more? Well, we have the spine to say, we're not getting in that business. We've tried to do it twice. It's a bad business, right? And so we're not interested. You're going to have to go out there and shed your blood, right? Which, they have. So will we, will the Department of War, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the president, will they all be able to resist that? Because I think it will certainly come, because as you and I talked, and you're seeing more and more videos come out of Iran of individual soldiers who are talking about our commanders left. They hide underground like rats. They leave us, the conscripts. There's 3 of us guarding a base. It's getting blasted all the time. We sleep out in the dirt so we won't get killed. And so that's going on, and so will somebody rise up out of that? And I think that's why you got to make it hurt. They have to be conquered, right? They have to know that they are defeated. And then out of that, maybe something good comes. But I would certainly say they're not there yet. You have people there that still think that we could survive this. And that has to be expunged from their head. So, but I think it's the hardest part of this. What we're doing now isn't easy, but it's much easier than the whole nation building business and winning the peace. So this sets of conditions to try to win the peace, but at the end of the day, if it doesn't go right and the Chinese go in there with all their money and they start bribing people, could you see a scenario where the Iranians would be heavily influenced by China? Not out of the question, right? And so your thoughts,
China's been in there.
Yeah, your thoughts about all that.
Well, China's been in there already, and I saw a report. I don't know whether MSNBC's debunked it or not, that the Chinese people in Iran are trying to fly out of China, and a one-way ticket is several $100,000. It's so hard to get out of there. They've been in there. They've invested a lot of their prestige in propping up Iran in exchange for easy access to oil. So I don't know if they're going to go back. I don't see them coming back in there. But I do. You mentioned Mogadishu. It was our deploying Marines into Beirut again to rescue the PLO from the Christian militia because of the PLO refugee camp slaughters that were broadcast on media that got the Marines into Beirut but to do what? It was rather pointless, and it cost us 241 Marines and soldiers when the Iranians blew up the headquarters.
Don't forget don't forget the sailors that were involved in that too, because you were one.
That's right.
Right. No, and I say that. No, I say that with great
you're
respect.
right. You're right. And the corpsmen.
Right. Can I tell you a personal story about that? So I'm at OCS when the building gets blown up, when the barracks get blown up. That summer, I'm working for Merrill Lynch in Encino, California, right, in the San Fernando Valley. Now, Encino, heavily Jewish community, right? Michael Jackson lived there. It's just on the other side when you go from Los Angeles, Westwood, Brentwood. If you go over the mountains to the north, right, the mountains that extend to Malibu and Westwood and Beverly Hills and all that stuff. Anyway, those hills, mountains, you go over those, right, as you come down the 405 on the left, Encino, okay? So that's where I work. I'm getting my haircut there. And guys got the TV on. And it was right after Ariel Sharon had gone into those refugee camps that I imagine were safe havens, right? And the IDF goes in there and they kill a lot of people. And I would imagine some of them were very bad people and some of them were not. And it got a ton of press coverage. So I'm sitting in the barber chair, he's cutting my hair. And he motions with the scissors. What do you think of that? And I said, I think sometimes Israel operates with too heavy of a hand. And they do that because we provide an umbrella of protection for them. They know Big Brother looms. So, I mean, they can handle their business pretty much, but they know that we're there to protect them. And he looks at me and he said, that's an interesting opinion. And then he pulls up his shirt, his barber smock.
Oh, no shit.
Swear to God. He said, I don't think I don't think most people can understand. He said, but I do. And, you know, I don't know what I expected that number to look like if you ever saw it in real life.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a barcode, right? It's not a computer. It is disgusting because it's a human tattoo, crooked, numbers fucked up, and all that kind of stuff. And I don't even know what I said.
Wow.
Exactly.
Wow.
So it was that incident, and I'll never forget it. Right. You know, and the white barber smock that would come up like to his middle of his neck, and you know, yeah. And so, so our ability to resist doing that, right? And then, and even though we've learned a ton, right? And I don't want to go into the Beirut incident, but if you read it, it's just heartbreaking in its stupidity. And to think all those guys lost the only life they ever had because of we're afraid to have a sentry that has a magazine in the weapon and a round in the chamber that's guarding all these people, right?
Yeah, I know.
It's
unbelievable when you read
and
that.
that we all have all these guys in one building, you know? And so, and again, I know a lot of people don't like that phrase, they came in peace, but they operated like they were in garrison, you know? So everything they did was, we're not threatened here. There's stuff going on around us. And when we go outside, we need to be vigilant. But us here, I mean, if you can imagine a sentry at a gate in a foreign nation, but nothing like that had ever happened in their defense. And we learned a very difficult lesson. And if you remember, in the Gulf War, Marines got off ships and went straight into the desert.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Well, why are the Marines out in the desert spread out? They've learned some hard lessons in this part of the world. So anyway, let's talk about, let me put a map up so that everybody can see what we're talking about. And then let's talk about the different, before we go to that, who are the major ethnic populations and what are their percentages? So number one is Persians, right?
Yep, Persians. And and number two would be the Azeris or Azerbaijanis.
Okay. So the Persians located primarily in the central part of the country, right?
They are. And if you look at the map that you're going to put up, there's also a big part of the country that says Lurs or Luros. Their Lurs is how you pronounce it. But they're essentially nomadic Persians. There's not a whole lot of difference between them and the Persians. They're like the Kuchi are in Afghanistan. They're just were migrating sheep herders up until, I don't know, 1940s.
Okay, so you can see on Tim's map the green area in the center, right? Mm-hmm. That is Persian area, and then the, how do you say that? Lorars?
Yeah, I think the Lors is
the Lors you can see extends out to the Iraqi border to the west. So that's Persian. So now the Kurds, where are they, Timmy?
They're on the eastern part of Iran. Wait a second, I've got that exactly backwards, don't I? Excuse me. They're on the western part of Iran. The eastern part being the western Afghanistan, which is how I'm used to looking at that stupid thing. But they're on the western border up in those Zagros Mountains, and they've got I think they're number 3 as far as population percentage. There's a significant number of them up there. And of course there's Kurds also in Iraq, and there's Kurds also in Turkey.
So on that map, the yellow region in the upper left corner, that would be the northwest corner of Iran. That's the Kurds. And the biggest thing the Kurds have is they'll fight, right? They'll fight. And they stretch across in that region. They stretch across to the northern part of Iraq. And and they're a dependable, tough, they will fight force, and they have been that way in Iraq in spite of everything that's been done to them. And so,
Hmm.
you can see a scenario where they would say, "Hey, we'll go do this, but at the end of this, we want a piece of this. We want a country." So that'll be interesting. The Azerbaijan. So then to the right of that yellow area, that's where the Azerbaijan's right are right, and I
Right.
think they're 17% of the population. The Kurds are 10%, and the Baluchs that you'll talk about that are the orange down in the southeast corner, down by the North Arabian Sea, that on that southern coast, they're like 2.3% of the population. So that makes
Hmm.
up what, 30% of the population is those three groups, with the Azerbaijans forming the majority of that. So talk about the Azerbaijans, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay, they're a significant presence in Iran. I think I misstated their affiliation in our last conversation. They are Shia. There's no history of them trying to advocate for or break away from Iran. They seem to be pretty happy there. The only militia they have are are the ones they recruited by the Quds Force to fight in other areas. So they are in no way represent a threat to the Iranian regime. They're not trying to join up with Azerbaijan or anything like that. The two biggest ones that I thought were going to be a problem were the Kurds and the Baluch. Now, the Kurds are a substantial presence in Iran, and Iran used them. They used to arm them to go fight in Iraq, and I think it was in the early '70s was the last time that they were doing that, and had to have some kind of a treaty in order to stop that. Of course, since then the Kurds have been maintaining a rather low scale, intense conflict with Turkey, trying to carve out their own Kurdistan homeland, which has been a problem. And if you remember the first administration, Trump administration, Trump said, "Hey, we're pulling out. We no longer going to protect the Kurds," because during the fight with ISIS, the Kurds hosted a lot of special forces, American special forces units up there. There may still be some up there now, for all I know. And I remember at the time when he said that, everybody was saying, "We're going to abandon the Kurds. This is awful. The Kurds are going to fall," and nothing became of it. I think that Turkey went into Syria and tried to rout the Kurds, and the Kurds weren't budging. They do a very good job of defending themselves. They're tough fighters. So
Maybe
there's been
I'll tell you what,
reports.
to me, maybe the most effective fighters in the region. Um,
Absolutely, I would absolutely concur with that. And one of the few effective militaries that use women fighters. There's tons of them in Kurdistan,
Is it,
which is rather surprising.
you've seen those stories, but you always wonder if somebody's doing a feature and trying to promote what yesterday was the day of the woman or something like that, and so you're reading
Yeah.
these stories. Is that overstated? And the answer from you is no, it's not overstated.
I don't know that. I know that I see constant reports of them. I've seen reports of them being effective, but I've never been able to. I mean, I don't have any SF friends that have been up there that could tell me what the real deal is. I find it suspicious, but only because for the reasons that it would be suspicious anyway. I mean, there's a
Right.
reason why under 15 boys teams consistently beat Olympic female soccer teams. There's a reason for that, and
Well,
and I
okay,
I,
so
I think that's the same in Kurdistan too.
got it. Let's go back to
Yeah.
the Baluchs. Down in the lower right hand corner,
Right.
2.3% of the population, and they're affiliated. How?
Okay, they are Sunni Muslims also. They've got their own province. It's a large province in Iran, the Sistan Baluchistan province, and they've got a big ass port there, the Charbadar port, which you're familiar with from your time in the Gulf of Oman. that connects us. And this is what was this is my I got a lot of history with the Baluch, and that history stems from when I came to Lashkar to support you and Dave and Paul Kennedy. That's why I volunteered to come out and do the USAID Community Development Program. When I went to Leatherneck and said, how can I help? They said, how much can you dump into Nimroz province? Now Nimroz was to the west of you, to
Okay,
the
so
and
let me just explain. So if you see
yeah.
where the Baluks are, okay, that orange stuff, and if you go north of that across the Afghan border, if you look in the center of the Afghanistan map and you go down towards the bottom, that's where the Helmand province was. So that's where we were, and that's where Timmy came
Right.
to see us. Okay, and you can see Iran to the west of that, right? And then you can see the Baluch region, right, to essentially to the southwest and butting up against the Iranian Afghan border. So that's
Right.
and again I started when I looked at the map, I don't know where the hell I thought I was, but
We
I
you
looked and
see
I looked and I thought, holy shit, man! I wasn't that far from Pakistan, and I wasn't that far from the the Indian Ocean, the Northern Arabian Sea, the Gulf of Oman, all that shit. Like, what the
yeah.
hell? But I'd never really looked at the region because that wasn't my business. My business was Ao Montezuma, right, in the northern, well, in the central part of the Helmand province. So I felt very
Yeah.
stupid.
Where you see where that Afghanistan, where that sharp 90-degree angle is between Pakistan, Iran, and Afghanistan. A
Yes.
little bit above that is Zaranj, which was the capital of Nimroz province. And Nimroz province, with the exception of the Delaram area, was 100% Baluch. Not 100%, 99% Baluch, I should say.
Okay.
There were Pashtuns up in the Delaram area, and Delaram wasn't even part of Nimroz province. They carved it out into Nimroz to drive down the incident numbers in friggin' Helmand. I'm convinced that's why they did that.
So
Sometime
so
in the early 2000s.
and so that's where you encountered the Blues.
The Baluch were down in Zaranj, right? And so in between Delaram and Zaranj is nothing but desert. There's a number of districts there that were essentially abandoned, and what I was asked to do by the G9 was to go down and help out Governor Brahoui, who was an old. Brahoui had been a leader against fighting the Soviets. He was a graduate of the Kabul Military Academy. Brahawis, by the way, are a subset of the Baluch. I didn't know this until I started looking at it in preparation for this, but they speak a distinct Indo-Turkic language that's different than Baluch, but essentially they're the same. And so what we did is we started doing all the irrigation systems down there because I thought Governor Brahoui was as close to honest a politician as you're going to find in Afghanistan. He was all about trying to help out the people. And once we got the irrigation systems going, where it butted up against you in Charbodak district, and then in the Kang district, where I had lots of problems with the Iranian border guards. Once we got those going, those districts filled up with farmers. I mean, like 30,000 of them, because it was incredibly fertile land as long as it's irrigated. When it's not irrigated, it turns into desert. So part of that effort was spawned by the opening of what was called Route 606, which connected, which went from the border up to Delaram and connected right with the port of Chabahar, which is a big ass damn port that's all inside of Baluchistan. So one of the things I was trying to do was stimulate. The plan was to stimulate economic growth, and then you had a route that goes right to the sea for exporting whatever the hell it is they wanted to export, which in theory would have been pomegranate and some of the other stuff that Afghanistan grows well, but in reality turned out to be poppies.
Right.
Dope.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What
but
so
that was why I was there.
so when you say Baluchistan, right? That's not a country.
Nope, it is. It is not. It's a province in Iran that butts up against a province in Pakistan called Baluchistan. Also, most of the Baluch are in Pakistan, and they've been fighting the Pakistanis at least for the last 20 years on a rather sustained basis, trying to carve out their independent homeland.
Right.
That's the reason I thought the Kurds and the Baluch represented a wild card in this operation. There's more of them in Pakistan than there is in Iran. Obviously, there's a ton of them up there in Nimroz province, and I doubt they went over to the Taliban side. I sent you a picture from the day we were driving out to open up the Charbajak irrigation system, which actually cut Iran off from the Helmand water, not because of our check dam, but because of the maintenance upstream at Kajiki. I hadn't accounted for that. That was rather dramatic because Iran sent a bunch of missiles into Saranj when they got pissed off about that. And but at any rate, there's a lot of armed. There was all the security forces in Nimroz province were also Baluch, and they have very little tolerance for the Pashtun, although they're all of them a bunch of damn land pirates. So they'll smuggle stuff for them. They'll make money off them, but they don't like them.
What about
And
what about the Baluch's relationship? For instance, when you hear that the Kurds, right, are either we're making overtures or they've made overtures, or there is a area of interest of mutual interest here, where they believe they can carve out a greater area for their own security, and they'll do that in exchange for favors, right? And that makes sense to everybody. Everybody's like, well, if you've been around there and you follow this stuff, it would make sense to you. The next part is the Baluchs. When you hear, so you just said the Azerbaijans, right? They're not going to do anything. All right, they're the largest ethnic minority, but they're Shiites and they're happy. And then you go down into the south to the Baluchs. Have they ever? Do they go to war with the Iranians? Does that?
yes, oh yeah, they've been fighting a lot in Pakistan, but Iran and Pakistan did a joint operation in 2024 and went down into Baluchistan to take out some military bases that they had down there. So I'm not familiar with. I don't recall seeing a lot of YouTube videos of Baluchi of freedom fighters attacking Iranian military units like you do in Pakistan. You could watch hours of that stuff on YouTube now because they make a big deal about attacking Pakistan all the time. But apparently, Iran they've caused enough problems with Iran that in 2024, Iran and Pakistan cooperated on a military operation to take them to start, I guess what we would call mowing the lawn.
Wow.
So I know that I do believe that the Baluchistan portion of Pakistan contains a shit ton of undeveloped minerals and oil. Of course, they've got that nice port and that nice highway system that goes right into Central Asia. So the Baluchis, they're sitting on valuable terrain that I would be surprised if they're not going to exploit. But I don't know their predisposition to jump in to this thing because unlike the Kurds, they don't have a relationship with special forces or our CIA or anybody else that I'm aware of. And I spent a lot of time with them. I think I would have known if they had.
So
And bear in mind, the reason that I was down there and you weren't was nobody wanted to be that close because Zaranj is on the border with Iran. It is right there. You can throw a rock and hit Iran. I dealt with Iranian border guards all the time. That's why the Marines were never down in Nimroz. You were responsible for it as part of Task Force Southwest. But the only time that they ever sent anybody down there, those guys got IED. It was not a pretty sight.
The
And
so the bottom line with this, so everybody, the Baluchs after the Kurds are the largest ethnic minority, right? Everybody else, when you hear these different names of different groups,
Mhm.
everybody else is south of 2.3% of the population. So you talk about extremely small numbers around the nation. And so Persians make
and
up
not armed.
essentially, right, and Persians make up essentially 50% of the country, right,
Mhm.
and the center of the landmass of the nation. Those other three ethnic minorities, one, the largest, the Azerbaijanis, they're in with the Iranians. And so you
Mhm.
have the Kurds and the Baluchs. The Baluchs have never shown a propensity to go on the offensive or anything like that. They essentially protect what's theirs, yada, yada, yada. So when we
Right.
hear about the ethnic minorities, I just wanted to come on because it's like, okay, well, what is that? How formidable is that? And so the bottom line still, in terms of as this war continues to pummel the shit out of Iran and everything that has to do with their ballistic missile production, their nuclear weapons program, and their security infrastructure, right? And again, forcing them to say, we give up, we can't do this anymore, right? And that's why this has to go on. And that's why there can be no, that's why the president's right in saying, no, 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 unconditional surrender. Now, Donald Trump talks a lot of shit, right? And then all of a sudden
Mhm.
you find out he's making a deal because he gets the terms that he wants. So it'll be interesting. But I think that uh, what movie was it, Timmy, where the line that comes out of the movie, one of them is, a people has to know when they're defeated, right? And I can't remember what movie that's from, but you know, if you
Oh,
that's
rem-
you can't take your foot off their throat until they submit, until they acknowledge, right? And
yeah.
so the whole idea, and I mean, through this in World War II, right? You
Right.
know, people that will argue against dropping of the atomic bombs on Japan. Hey, man, you have to know when you're defeated, and if you don't, then it has to continue for the sake of peace on the other side. Because if you don't defeat them, if you don't destroy their will to believe in this bullshit, right, then you're just going to do it again. And so that's why, to me, that's why the next 2 weeks are important. The
Mhm.
continual humiliation, right, and getting drug around like a rag doll of Iran in public, and then there's going to come a phase of retribution. And I want you to talk, give you whatever thoughts you want on what I just said, Timmy, and then I want you to talk about the retribution phase because, right, there's a lot of things that have gone on in that country, and people just had to
Mhm.
live with them. And now when that governor gets taken off, and people can go look for people that wrong family members and things like that, that's not going to be, you're going to see public executions of government officials. You're going to see them strung up in soccer stadiums and shit like that. That's going to be just a natural outpouring of rage from the Iranian people towards the people that did this to them. So give me your thoughts on all that.
The one thing I wanted to say about the Baluch and the Kurds before I transition to that, the only reason I think that the Baluch people would start getting ideas of carving out their own little space is because Pakistan and Afghanistan are fighting right now. So Iran's getting pummeled. Pakistan and Afghanistan are fighting. Mainly Pakistan's just bombing the hell out of Afghanistan. And that's why I was concerned about the Baluch. I certainly hope the reports I've seen about the Kurds being armed and encouraged by us to go in there are not true. I believe the president has said that they aren't. because I'm not so sure that's going to help any damn thing at all. I, I hope that the Kurds just stay put, but we'll have to. I have no knowledge about what they're going to do. We've seen, for instance, when the Ceausescus were taken out in Romania, we'll go back to France at the end of World War II, retribution from a civilian population that has endured harsh treatment, and the Iranians, I guess, lost 20,000 were killed in the last few weeks before we started piling on in there.
And that's just
That's going to
recent,
be
and that's
blamed.
just recently.
That's recent. Well, yeah, yeah, and that's people protesting, men, women, children. It's going to be violent. It's going to be nasty. I don't know if there's such a thing as a moderate Islamic mullah inside of Iran. I know there were in Afghanistan because I talked to some of them. They were who were concerned only about the people of Afghanistan. I remember talking to one early in the war when I thought we were going to do something positive there, and I told him, we're going to get this country rebuilt. You'll wait and see. And the guy said, that's irrelevant. The only thing that's relevant is the soul of the Afghan people, which has been tortured by continuous war. You coming in and building stuff is not helping. What we've got to do is heal the people. And I'm pretty sure he was a Shia. I'm pretty sure he was. I'm pretty sure he was a Hazara guy, but a very learned and thoughtful person. I don't know how many of those are in Iran, quite frankly, because the theocracy has been particularly brutal and stubborn. So I do
Well,
believe that
and oh, by
once
the
they're
way,
cleared,
it's been there for a while too, right?
oh yeah,
It's been
they
there
they
for a
have.
while, and then the IRGC, everybody needs to know, they're a business. It's like they're the
Hmm.
mafia, but the mafia controls their ballistic missile program. The mafia controls their nuclear weapons program. The mafia controls oil production,
Exactly,
right? And so,
exactly.
so the IRGC is not simply a military endeavor, right? It
No,
is
they make a
very
lot of
much
money.
like the Taliban were in Afghanistan. The movement of opium, the growing of opium, all taxed to support the Taliban. The Taliban is involved in everything, and so
Well, they
that
were the ones moving the opium through Iran. The IRGC were. Yeah.
and so it's a commercial endeavor as well as being a military endeavor, and so if you don't understand that, and so when you look at it that deep, and for that many years, I mean, to me, it'll be interesting to watch, and that's coming up. The
Yeah.
I want to ask you a question about Pakistan, and we're gonna kind of stray here as we wind it up, but this is Pakistan. This is why Pakistan kept Afghanistan destabilized. Okay, so Pakistan sits in the middle of India and Afghanistan. India, a belligerent nuclear power, right, relative to Pakistan. Now, the president of the United States, what was it, last summer when they got after each other, right? President Trump got involved in it, and he said, yeah, we can't have this. And so, but the tension is always there on that border. And now you have Afghanistan, the Taliban, willing to fight them. This is Pakistan's worst nightmare, right?
It is. It is. And the Baluch are fighting them and have been fighting them. They're not sissies. Those guys can fight too. And they got a lot of ordnance from us. I know they did because all that stuff in Nimrod's province did not end up in the Taliban's hands. I'm convinced of that.
Right. Right. So it's just in terms of the geopolitics of the region, right? Pakistan beginning to live a nightmare because they just got into a few huge fights on the border with the Taliban. And so that is
Yeah.
not what they want to be committing their military to, and all the destabilization efforts that they facilitated relative to the Taliban, right? Mercifully, right, are coming back to haunt them, right?
Yeah. And I have very little sympathy for them.
None,
Yeah.
none, none. And so, you know, yeah, be careful who you dance with. Be careful who you dance with. Talk to me, Timmy. You're working where now? People got introduced to you as Mr. Free Range International, and
Yeah.
but you're now in your writing efforts and what they're not. You're more on Substack than you are doing
Right.
anything on Free Range International. Yes.
Right. Yeah, it's just yeah, Substack's just a much easier platform to publish on, and I actually have paying people pay me. I don't know why. It's I'm flattered, but yeah, I try to get something up on Substack at least once a week about whatever the heck it is, and I don't have a particular interest that whatever's interested me. I write a lot about Mexico because I'm kind of fascinated by Mexico, being on the border with Mexico as I am, and of course when stuff like this pops off, I write about that, and so whatever the heck it is that's of interest to me, I put stuff out. I write about climate change because I always thought that was an appalling scam, and so I write about very subjects. I've got some really cool followers, and that's where I put all my stuff now. I don't.
So
I think
how
the
does
free range.
how does somebody find you on Substack?
Tim Lynch's Substack. Just go on Substack and type in Tim Lynch, and you'll come right up on my page. And I've been doing it for a couple of years. There's a lot of stuff there, and a lot of it is I transferred over from Free Range International. Every once in a while, I throw out something that's interesting, like going through the Khyber Pass, or talking about my beef with the CIA in Afghanistan and that kind of stuff. I write about that kind of stuff too because I got a little history, I got a little intelligence history, and I don't mind writing about it, because
Let
I
me.
was not working
Okay,
for the
so
government.
since you talked about Mexico, um, it, the first time in my recollection that the United States has admitted publicly to conducting kinetic operations in Latin America happened within what, the last 72 hours? In where, Ecuador?
Yeah, I think it was Ecuador. Uh-huh.
What do you make of that?
Well, it appears that there's a lot of South American countries which are rejecting their experiments with leftist socialism and their progressive movements. It started in Central America, what's it? It's El Salvador, right? When they locked up all the MS-19 gangs and every other buddy they thought was a gang, they put them in those supermax prisons and drove the murder rate from the highest in the world to one of the lowest. So there is people on Donald Trump's side of the ledger that have won in, I believe, Argentina, and I mean the only places that don't have kind of right wing governments, not right wing moderate governments. The only countries that don't right now are Colombia, Venezuela, and Brazil. That's it. All the rest of them seem to be trending towards cooperating with the United States, fighting the narcos, trying to drive their crime rates down and make it attractive. I mean, hell, there's a lot of what's it, Ecuador? There's a couple of those countries in South America that have large populations of retirees from America. They
Right,
encourage them to come
right.
because that they bring in money, and so it's interesting to see how many of those governments are now looking to make the lives of their citizens better, which is something the government of Mexico is completely uninterested in. Same with Venezuela. Colombia, I'm not so sure. They at least have a decent sized middle class. I mean, Mexico used to have a pretty decent sized middle class until the narcos took over, starting in
Well,
the
so
70s.
what do you make of the most recent killing, right, based on American intelligence and whatnot, of what was that guy's name in Mexico? Starts with an M.
El Mencho.
El
El
Mencho.
Mencho.
What do you make of that?
Yeah.
I think that stunned a lot of people, in particular in Mexico. And then you saw the fallout afterwards, as what is that? The Jalisco cartel
Yeah, the
group,
Jalisco, the CJNG.
right?
Yes.
So those guys,
Jalisco.
those guys flex their muscles by burning cars and all the shit they did. But what do you make of that? Are these the opening salvos in a broader war that against the cartels in all of Latin America?
I don't know that that's the case or not. I think the one that what we saw happen to that guy El Mencho was payback for his attempt to assassinate the head of security of Mexico 2 years ago in Mexico City. Shot him 3 times. And I'm blanking on his name right now. I wrote a Substack about that because that particular individual, and I'll just blank on the name, is close to Scheinbaum because I don't think Scheinbaum's the person that's gonna start telling Mexican armed forces to go after guys like El Mencho and make sure he doesn't survive the attack. They had no intentions of taking him alive. There's probably a good chance that they shot him on the way to Mexico City. So it would be we will know Mexico is cooperating with dismantling the cartel, narco terrorist groups that have taken over so much of the countryside. When Mexico starts turning over the politicians that have cooperated and enabled them too, not just the narcos. They've turned over 94 aging narco bosses to us. Some of them are not aging. So one of them was a Canadian
Yeah, but
Silver
let me
Star
ask you a question.
Olympic medal.
If you're a politician, you don't have a choice. Your choice is to accept what they'll tell you, because it's not like they come to negotiate. Either you're going to do it, or you're going to quit. So we'll get somebody else to do it, or we'll kill you and your family. So to me, as a former politician, right? Um, I mean, I think I would quit. I'll resign. I won't do that, right? And so I don't like I don't like what you just said, because I see it when it's not episodic like in the United States. And maybe that's a naive view of the United States, but in the United States you can resist that. You can say I'm being threatened by this group and you can be protected. It's not that way in Mexico. You can't do that.
That head of security, I just looked it up. Omar Garcia Harfuch, he did it. He has a reputation for being staunchly against them.
Yeah,
I don't
but
think
he can
Shine.
provide for his own security. If you're like an assemblyman in or whatever, so to me, you have to create, and I'll draw a simile relative to Iran. The reason that pounding the shit out of them is important, and that everybody sees it and feels it, they feel the ground shake, right? And they see this go on and on and on and on, is so that the people will be emboldened to come forward and take this thing over. Okay. And so to me, until Mexico, you know, begins to kill narcos on a regular basis, so that politicians can say, yeah, I'm not doing this anymore. To me, it's just, it would be an exercise in futility.
It would be, but as you said, after El Mencho was killed, they took over, I think, 26 states and started burning stuff and whatnot. Now remember, he was tracked down by a joint U.S. intelligence cooperative, which is stood up and started focusing all of our considerable SIGINT and other electronic measures on Mexico to track him down. They easily could have tracked down all those people burning trucks and fighting with the police back to their hidey holes and started knocking them off, which is what we would do. I mean, if that was an American Jasotov operation, once those guys unmasked themselves like that, Delta would be out there with the
Yeah.
SEALs just taking them down
Tell
every fucking
everybody,
night.
tell everybody what the soda is.
That's a joint special operations task force. In our special operations, as we saw recently in Venezuela, are very adept at doing raids. They were very adept at doing them in Afghanistan, for that matter. And so, and apparently the SEALs went in and trained that army unit that took out El Mencho, and so Scheinbaum has allowed armed American military onto her soil, something they've never done before. That's a positive thing, but it's a mystery to me. So you get a 3-day temper tantrum by the CJNG, and nobody follows those guys back to their lairs and starts laying the wood to them. I mean, but Mexico's got Apache helicopters. They've got jets. Oh, which reminds me, by the way, here on the border, I see a lot of our military jets flying up and down this damn Rio Grande Valley. All not often, but
What
a couple
what
times a week.
what kind of aircraft?
I don't know because they're too far up for me to see. We get a lot of jets from Navy trainer jets down here landing in McAllen and taking off, and they'll park and stay overnight. I don't know why,
And
but they're
McAllen, not far from Corpus Christi, which right is
yeah,
the
or Kings
training
and
base.
Kings,
Kingsville.
right? And Kingsville is where the jet trainers are too, and Kingsville's just right up the road. So that's not unusual to see Navy jets down here that are training. But I'm seeing jets that come over that river, and sometimes they'll come in low and hot and make a god awful amount of noise, just tearing up the air as they go up and down the Rio Grande. I don't know what that's all about. I suspect they're Air Force because now the portion of the Rio Grande River that was the boundary commission lands from back when we established a boundary with Mexico in I don't know 1946, I believe. All those have been turned over to the military. It's now considered a part of Joint Base Lackland Air Force Base, and they've strung concertina along some parts of this. I mean, a lot of it that introduces a shit ton of friction to people trying to come across a river. I mean,
That's a good thing.
the border walls itself is hard, but now as they come up from the river, they got to go through triple, sometimes more strands of concertina, and there's all kinds of pictures of them getting caught up in that shit. That's
Yeah,
rather
which is
unpleasant.
really a delay mechanism to allow
It's all it is.
the border patrol to get there and yoke them up. Let's
Yeah.
conclude with an Iran question. So, what do you expect to see next?
I think we're going to see Iran capabilities continue to be degraded. Last night they shot some ballistic missiles at Israel, but their payload was cluster munitions. Which, what the hell are cluster munitions going to do unless you got a bunch of people up in the open? That's just essentially like throwing hand grenades at the damn thing. So I suspect they're running towards they're running out of stuff, or they wouldn't be wasting ballistic missiles with cluster munitions because they're not going to hurt the Israelis. They've got bunkers and stuff like that. They're not going to do squat. I think 3 people were injured by shrapnel from that attack, and that's it. So I mean, it looks devastating, but that's not effective. That's not effective targeting. That's not effective at all. So I think that they're going to get towards the end of their rope. I would hope that within the next 10 days, 14 days, that we wrap this thing up and call it done and dusted. But that's up on the Iranians. They've got to make some type of they've got to deal with the Donald, and they've got to make him happy, or they're going to continue to get their asses handed to them like they are. And I can't get over that the cheap drones that we have, the things that Will were talking about. I've never thought I'd see the day when our Pentagon would buy cost-effective munitions that they can throw at people on one-way missions, and it's only a $20,000-$30,000 shot. We can do that shit all day.
I read things and they raise my eyebrow. And especially when somebody says the transformation of war, right? And the reason it raises my eyebrow is because of all the times in history when that's been said. Okay. And so you see technology that gets invented and then applied to the battlefield, right? This will revolutionize war, right? Just in our own American Civil War, right? The rifled musket that we know as a rifle, okay? The mini ball, right? And you combine those things, it creates an extremely accurate rifle shot. Transformed war. And it did for a while. But then there was a solution to it. And what was the solution? We're not going to march in close order formations anymore. We're going to spread out. And we're going to make, even if you can shoot us, you're going to have to shoot us individually. And so the problem was in some ways mitigated. Then the machine gun, right? And then the tank. We take a tractor and a radio and a gun, and we put it in this metal box. Well, then what was the countermeasure? A bigger gun. And then what was the countermeasure to that? more armor. And what was the countermeasure to that? A bigger gun. And then what was the countermeasure to that? We took the armor and we angled it, therefore making it thicker. What was the answer to that? A shape charge, right? What was the answer to that? Applique armor. So you got a layer of armor on the outside of the tank. The shape charge hits it, spins itself, and then the actual explosive energy gets funneled against the outside of the tank. Too bad, so sad. What's the answer to that? The TOW-2 Bravo, right? Which is to fly over the tank and shoot down from the top. And so it's this constant spiral of technology and men on the battlefield. And to me, when you say, well, this absolutely transforms war, for instance, drones, at some point, somebody's going to integrate an electronic pulse that destroys every bit of infrastructure, every bit of electronics that is operating. And they're going to be able to integrate that into their own comm architecture, much like we do frequency hopping. So we have radios that frequency hop, like 1,000 times a second. Something stupid, right? I don't know, the comm people know, I don't. And so, we frequency hop and then we encrypt that and nobody can hear us. Well, at some point, somebody's going to figure out how to integrate some kind of pulse, electronic pulse that blows everything out of the sky, right? And so then you see, the whole issue of, well, hypersonic missiles, they go really fast. You can't knock them out. Okay, what are they going to shoot? Well, so you got to acquire the target. Okay, right. So if you want to shoot Mount Rushmore, you can do that. But if you want to shoot a dynamic target, you have to acquire the target. So if we own space, right, and we own the satellite war, then how are you going to acquire the target? You're going to acquire it World War II style. Somebody's got to see it, and then you got to shoot it, and it's going to be moving. And so this whole AI in, this is revolutionizing. Whenever you hear that, to me, I always say, until it doesn't, until somebody comes up with an effective countermeasure that maybe doesn't exist today that will change all of that. And I mean, it's interesting, the whole Davidson window with China and all that. Well, there was, in the whole discussion of the Davidson window, there's never been a discussion of there's no more need for American naval forces in the Persian Gulf region. Completely changes the discussion. What? Mm-hmm. What do you mean? What happens if Iran went away as a belligerent? I don't even know what to say. So all those naval assets and all those Air Force assets that are in the region, what happens if they're needed anymore? Holy shit. Well, it has huge implications for the Western Pacific. And so
we spent our entire lives focused on that region. It's remarkable.
Right. And so to me, that's when I hear this is the transformation. War will never be the same. Yeah, well, it wasn't the same after Cambrai when, these gigantic tractor things with armor and a machine gun went rolling over, trenches that had been there for years. Right. And so to me, I hear that and it makes me smile because in our history, people have said that more than a few times. And we don't know what technology and science hold for us in the next 50 years. And we don't know what military applications will be derived of that, right? Maybe something is able to render AI, And again, there's if Americans didn't look inward relative to what the Mossad did with the cameras, if Americans don't think the Chinese, right, who are making a bunch of this shit, and that's why when people start pounding the tables, we've got to get them out of our business. If you don't think the Chinese have shown the same capabilities into the shit they're selling, you're dumb as fuck, right? Because they have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So,
yeah. There's a guy on Substack called the let's see, the centrist libertarian patriot. He writes a Substack thing called the Gen X Reader Substack, and he is just crowing and crowing that this Iran operation validates everything that General Berger proves that the what he calls the compass point and Zinni and everybody else and were wrong. He takes great pleasure, relish in pointing that out. He pounds Zinni and Krulak all the time. But the thing is there's nothing about this Iranian operation. What the Marine Corps divested itself of and doesn't have has nothing to do with what's going on now. We could have not divested any damn thing, and we would still have the same capabilities that we're doing now in Iran. So I don't. He's a very smart guy, but I don't understand his points sometimes. And my point being that I don't think that this validates much of anything other than we got the right guy in office, and when you allow the Pentagon to focus on lethality, this is the result you get, and I think it's fantastic. But I don't think that our Iran operation validates General Berger's Force Development 2030 at all. I just want to make that point because just like how I feel about that, like I feel about the CIA, I'll never give an inch. It just bugs me that much.
well, again, I think that before you begin that conversation about the about General Berger, you know, read the
Who's
Lynn Wells memo. Okay,
exactly,
it is it is
exactly.
it is the wisest thing I think I've ever seen written, and it concerns preparing for the next great threat. Okay, and Wells starts in the late 1890s, and he says if you were the Brits, you'd be looking across the English Channel at your erstwhile enemy, France, and then he just walks you through history, right? 15 years later, you're fighting a war as allies with France against Germany, right? And then now we're not going to do war anymore because we've had the Great War, a naval buildup ensues, and and then 20 years later, a Second World War begins, and now you're allied with this and this and this and this and this nuclear, and he takes you through what we prepared for and then what actually happened. And so, but the greatest thing about the memo is the last line. And he's writing this to Secretary Rumsfeld, who then forwards it to President Bush. And you can find it on All Marine Radio. Just type in the word Wells, Wells, and hit enter. And you'll see there's a few things we've done with it. But he said, suffice it to say, I don't really know. But I can conclude from a study of history that it won't be what we're preparing for.
Yeah, that is the best line.
And so if that's your stepping off point, I think the point that most people would make is they thought that within the construct of the Marine Corps, within the way we configure maps and things like that, you could address what the Chinese threat, right? And we knew we had to divest of some things to get others, and everybody understands that. But you still got to be what we've always been, which is a Swiss Army knife for the nation. And for God's sakes, we can't, and again, what you see the United States doing, the ability to project power around the world, nobody can do that. And our amphibious forces are a part of that. Make no mistake about it. They're a part of that. And we can't get to see anymore. The Marine Corps cannot get to see except when the Navy's faking it. And so,
No,
so
it's so disappointing. And I want to stipulate because we both know him. Dave Berger's a decent man. He's a good dude. At least, but particularly as a company grade officer, I thought so. But God, I could not disagree with him more about what he did with that 2030 thing.
well, I'll tell you what, and the way it was done too, the whole non-disclosure agreement
Yeah,
thing. What are we doing as the
yeah.
Marine officers? Why are we signing shit like that? Why is somebody requiring that? And so I think the worst thing that came out of his commandancy was the moral injury that it did to the officer corps. But you had all kinds of
I
people
would
that
agree.
did not agree with it, but they didn't speak out. They didn't say shit,
No, no,
right? And we're supposed
you're
to.
absolutely right.
As Marine officers, we're supposed to vent our spleen. And when the guy in charge says, okay, I've heard everybody, here's what we're doing, everybody says, aye, aye, sir, and we do that. And if you can't do that, then you put in your papers and you leave.
Yeah.
But that's not the way.
It's a disappointing because he was our
Yeah.
generation, as is Eric Smith, and that's. I wish our generation had produced a better, more capable leaders to store the Marine Corps into the 21st century. Goddamn
Well,
disappointing.
and it's not like they weren't there, and we know them, but
Yeah.
he got chosen, and it is what it is. And now it would be helpful if again, but again, hopefully what will happen going through this turmoil is that the Marine Corps is going to come out at a better place, right? We'll be able to address the Western Pacific, but we'll also continue to be able to service all those other roles that wind up being so important because, as Lynn Wells points out, history tells
Like
us,
fighting in Ecuador.
right? History tells us that we're not going to do the fight that we expect. We'll do some other fight. So, Timmy, first of all, thank you for coming on and making us smart about the ethnic makeup of Iran. And the bottom line is, it's the Kurds or probably nobody, because the Baluchs don't stray very far. And so if anybody's going to do anything, it would be the Kurds. And your question is, how much could they do? How far could they go? And what you indicated was not very far.
No, it got that's some horrible terrain to try to get through. I mean, they're mountain people, but mountain people know better than to try to be projecting a lot of power through the mountains. It's not easy.
And the other part of it is that the Iranians aren't going up there. They're moderately preoccupied at the time, and and so
Yeah.
I don't know how far they could go, and to what end they would go. In
Yeah,
terms of
I don't
straying
either.
outside what is normal for them. Anyway, all right, man. Tell everybody what they can find you on Substack again.
It's Tim Lynch Substack. Just Tim Lynch Substack. Yeah, that's all there is. I'm a very unimaginative guy. I don't have like a Gen X Substack reader or something other handle.
No, you don't need it. Most of the big timers, right? Most of the big timers have, right, their name on their show.
That's true.
The Rush
That's true.
Limbaugh show, right?
Well pointed. That's a good point.
Right. I've always thought that too vain though.
What's that? To have like a Mike McNamara show?
The Mike McNamara show. The closest I've ever come to that is Mac Talk.
Mac Talk isn't quite as bad. Man, I'm with you. All Marine Radio was a good one. It's just it was hard to find at first when you started because you type that on a browser and you get radios. It's like, God damn, this is what it would.
You would get commercial businesses selling radios in the maritime business. All Marine Radio.
Exactly. That's what you end up with. But after a while, man, you raised up there once you were around for a while, it was easy to find you.
Well, that's the trick. The trick, if you're building something, is consistency, right? And putting it out there, and slowly people find you, and then slowly you carve out a path. So people do know you. But anyway. All right, on a Saturday morning, thanks for doing this.
My pleasure, brother. Take care.
There you have it. Tim Lynch here on All Marine Radio. All right, that'll do it. Thanks for listening or watching or however you consume this. And we'll keep doing this. Obviously, we're watching the same things you're watching. And fascinating stuff. And just hope and pray that these events all go the way we'd like them to go. And the Middle East becomes a place that the likes of which we've never seen the place, which is a peaceful place. So say your prayers, keep your hopes up, hope everybody does the right thing, including our allies, and maybe the world will be a better place. So with that said, have a great weekend, And I think the next thing I'm going to try to do is with Will. Will, as you know, as some of you know, was a foreign area officer in the Marine Corps. And so his area of expertise was the Middle East. So what I want Will to do is come on and explain who's who in the zoo. Okay, all these nations that you're hearing about, um, Kuwait, Bahrain, right, Saudi Arabia, right, Syria, Lebanon, Turkey, Egypt, Yemen, uh, Oman, the UAE, right? So on this scorecard, who's who? Like, are they Arab, right? Are they not Arab? Right? Are they Sunni? Are they Shiite? Where historically has their allegiance fallen? So, want Will just to kind of help us with the scorecard. Who's who in the zoo? So, hopefully, we do that early next week, and we'll do more of just, talking current events and what we've seen. So, have a great weekend. I'm Mike McNamara. This is All Marine Radio. Thanks for tuning in. I'm out.